it looks like it's picking me up.
Yeah, it'll be tiny in Audacity for you because that stupid microphone.
Yeah, it's super low, but it's definitely getting little spikes. You should be able to get something out of it.
No, when you're all done, it'll normalize, and it actually pulls it out to a decent volume. I just have to cut out any big noises, but shouldn't be a problem. So, as it turns out, it actually was a bit of a problem. I set him up with the wrong microphone, and he got recorded entirely on his laptop. So just a heads up, the audio's a little rough on Travis's track. That's entirely my fault. Just so you know ahead of time, it is a little tinny, but I think the discussion was worth keeping. John did an amazing job pulling quality audio out of this file. It shouldn't happen again in the future, and I've got ways to work around it as a backup recording, but, bear with me as I figure out the best way to have guests on and everything. Tonight we've got Travis Sedai, Travis Modian, from Discord on as a guest, and my roommate of the last, how long has it been? Year and a half? Jesus. Yeah, no, so back in the day, if you remember, Patrick moved out to be with Julia. Yeah, Jules at the time, and Travis had just moved to Portland, and we had connected over the podcast, and it was like, hey, I need a roommate. Welcome to Portland. And I guess the rest is history.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little more complicated than that. I had a boyfriend at the time who I was supposed to be getting a place with, and then that fell apart, and it just became easier to not figure it out on my own.
Right.
Yay, romance. Failed romances.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Yeah, chapter 10.
All right.
Saying in the Borderlands.
And our symbol is the dragon on the flag, which is a Rand. And what's the saying in the Borderlands?
Duty is heavier than a mountain. Death is lighter than a feather. Really, the important part is duty is heavier than a mountain. That's what they always, that's like the mantra. Duty is heavier than a mountain. Duty is heavier. Might as well be the name of the fucking series sometimes.
Although I did like here in the beginning, it's like being beaten to death with feathers. And it's like death and feathers again coming together. I like that he makes that association really early on before you actually get the thing. Well, I'm going to read us in. Probably just the first paragraph, just to get us in the mood. For a moment, Rand wished for the days when he could have strolled the palace corridors alone. This morning, he was accompanied by Sulin and 20 maidens, by Baal, clan chief of the Goshin Aiel, with half a dozen Sovi Nai, knife hands, from Jirad Goshin, for Baal's honor, and by Bashir, with as many of his hawk-nosed Saldeans. They crowded the broad, tapestry-hung hallway, the Kadansor-clad Pardar's Mai and Sovi Nai, staring through servants who bowed or curtsied hastily and got out of the way, and the younger Saldeans swaggering in their short coats and their baggy breeches tucked into their boots. It was hot even here in the shaded passage, and dust motes danced in the air. Some of the servants wore the red and white livery they had worn when Morghese ruled, but most were new, garbed in whatever they had when they came applying for the job, a motley collection of farmers' and tradesmen's woolens, mainly dark and plain, but running the range of colors, with here and there splashes of embroidery or bits of lace. So he's just strolling through the palace with his guard. Where is he heading? Just to a meeting?
Probably. God, I listened to this chapter earlier today, and I'm not even sure exactly what it was he had going on. I think he's just doing stewardly duties for the most part, but I think it's really interesting that, as he's taking care of whatever it is he's taking care of, the next couple of chapters are basically just, him looking at everything else, seeing the new servants that aren't in livery, but they're wearing, their nicest clothes because they're working in the royal palace, and he's like, one more thing to add to the list. I have to ask the Rena Harford, the first maid, God, what a pretentious title, to make sure they all get proper livery so they don't have to wear their best clothes. But yeah, I just think it's super interesting that he's strolling through the royal palace post killing Ravine at this point. That happened at the end of the last book.
I want to say it's weeks later. We've had time to pass, but yes, he's just basically consolidating his power over Camlyn. He has taken it over. Ravin's dead. He's got some rebels out in the fields that are stirring up trouble. He's got a bunch of clerks who need, papers signed, and he's got all sorts of issues with the Aiel, the native people, and just, the craziness that is taking over a city. And one of the things he's thinking about is the ways in particular, right? The ways are a big issue for him, and he has no idea where they are. And that leads... There's a lot of thoughts in this chapter that lead to him taking actions later on. So we see later on he consults with Master Hammond and Loyal's mother. Yeah, and so that whole thing where he gets them to map out the way gates is what leads to him ending up going to Shadar Logoth, and where Lilith gets lost there, because he's there to seal up a way gate. So this thought leads to Leah. This thought leads to Leah being abandoned in Shadar Logoth, which has consequences then back in Book 7, that leads to Samael's death by Mashadar and the crossing of the streams and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I just love it when these little thoughts have, I can trace the thought, the first thought of how that plot line ends up going and why it ends up happening that way.
Yeah, I love how the very beginning of this chapter goes from 0 to 60 real fast. The whole beginning of this chapter is just him being very pensive and trying to get his thoughts and priorities in order, and thinking about the things he needs to do to get Camlyn in order, so that way he can pass it off to Elaine whenever he's able to give that off. And but also trying to balance that with the bigger things, the bigger pictures, the ways, because he knows that the Shadowspawn are using the ways, and he has to figure out what to do about that before the last battle. And just so much. He goes from being very pensive to with what happens at the end of this chapter, just going you begin to see the traces of Darth Rand kicking in.
Well, and there's some insanity here, right? He's in the middle of these thoughts. Bashir's talking to him. Abruptly, he laughed out loud, wondering whether Aes Sedai ever sweated. Maybe he was not mad yet, but he could pass fair for a wool-headed fool. Did I say something?
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that laugh is madness, necessarily.
Yeah, but everyone around him gives him the side eye, right? It's just, it's one of those things where, when your leader laughs out loud randomly in the middle of a serious conversation, you kind of, who is probably going mad and does hear voices in his head, you kind of give each other side eye. From outside perspective, that's not the best sign.
Yeah, I mean, he's talking to, or Bashir is telling him about, the refugee crisis in Camlyn, mm-hmm. and how the city is getting overcrowded, and all of the other things that are going on, and in the middle of all of that, he bursts out laughing from a thought in his own head that he realizes is absolutely ridiculous. And from us being able to be in his head, we can see that laugh wasn't necessarily hysterical or insanity induced. It was just, he had a random funny thought and realized the irony of it during what's all the bigger stuff that's going on around him, and chuckled at the people who aren't in his head. Yeah, exactly. I've definitely laughed at the things in my own head several times. I've caught myself walking through the house and grinning like an idiot, and I'm like, what am I smiling about? And then I remember what I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, usually it doesn't happen during a conversation. I guess Rand must have been really bored.
He was definitely distracted. Yeah, he was definitely preoccupied.
So here's a question I'd like you to answer. Why didn't Asmodean ever show Rand how to avoid sweating? Didn't he say, it's just a mental trick? Or, I can't remember him ever explaining it. Because here it says Taim shows him the mental trick.
He probably never thought to ask Asmodean, and Asmodean was never a willing teacher, despite the fact that he did teach Rand quite a bit. And Rand probably didn't worry about it. Most of the time that he was with Asmodean was in the waste, or a lot of the time that he was with Asmodean was in the waste. And then, you just expect to sweat like a stuck pig when you're in the waste. But I think that Asmodean never volunteered the information, one, because he was never prompted to, and two, because anything and everything that he could keep back was a small victory.
Yeah, and Shifty Chu says, I thought he tried. Asmodean, again, it was kind of a crappy teacher and just wasn't able to explain the mental trick. Asmodean was never a great teacher.
No, he wasn't.
Even before he got the power restricted. So that, I think, more than... Because I'm convinced that Asmodean would have done everything he could to help Rand. I just think he was such a bad teacher that he kind of was, like, fatalistic about it. Like, well, you're not going to learn anything from me. Why bother?
There's part of me that really wants to believe that Asmodean could have been redeemed, but the scene where he gets killed, his, like, inner monologue just goes to show that no matter how helpful he has been to Rand and how many times he has actually, like, gone above and beyond for Rand and, like, tried to save his life a couple of times or whatever, like, he's still bad to the bone.
Right. He still calls him the Great Lord. He still is the same person who tortured his mother and stilled her. And if his circumstances were different, he'd do the exact same thing again.
Right. He doesn't want to be saved. He has no desire to not be evil. Like, he's perfectly okay with being evil and having immortality. Like, that's... Yeah.
He's just stuck on the side of good because the evil side's going to kill him. So he's like, fine, I'll help the good side.
Because it was his only chance of survival. He'd been severed from the Dark One, cut off from the One Power, and had all of his allies, in heavy air quotes, turned against him because Lanfear convinced them that he switched sides. My opinion on it, if any of them could be redeemed, he was the closest to getting there. I also think potentially Lanfear could be.
That's where I was going to go. I thought Lanfear would be. Because
Lanfear's whole thing was power. She didn't necessarily need to be evil. She just saw the Dark One as an easier way or a more successful way of attaining power.
I'm always convinced that something about her drilling the hole is, like, somehow tainted her and caused her to...
Do you think that she was turned? I don't think she was turned. I think that she might have, because she and the guy that she was working with were the first people to reach through the bore. She's probably had the first one to have any real contact with the Dark One, and probably has had some of the most direct contact with the Dark One because of that.
Yeah, it's one thing we never find out. What are the consequences of drilling into the bore? Like, how does she survive that? What, there's that explosion of black.
Yeah, why was there no backlash that, like, tainted her or tainted Saidar when she cut through the bore with Saidar? I mean, she was probably in a link with the other dude, so it probably wasn't just one of the powers, but... I imagine that they cut into the Dark Ones. They cut through the seal.
Right, and at the beginning, it was a tiny hole. They cut, and then over time, with the hole, the Dark One was able to sort of wear away at the edges and expand it, and like open up the whole seal. And that's why, in the beginning of the War of Power, he didn't immediately escape, even though there was a hole with no patch. It was a tiny little hole. But now the patch is covering this big old hole, and if the seals are broken, the whole patch disintegrates.
Yeah, I totally agree with that excerpt right there. That she was the most ripe for the plucking even before the bore was drilled. We know that Lanfear's biggest motivation for everything that she did was power and prestige.
And from Robert Jordan's Q&A that he's saying here, it looks like the male Aes Sedai, Beldamon, went into hiding and eventually committed suicide over it, because they were basically persecuted and blamed for the release of the Dark One, whereas she went, and the persecution sort of drove her to the side of the dark.
Yeah, she kind of embraced it, and he kind of didn't. I've never heard the Bideman committed suicide, though. That's news to me.
I mean, I'm just reading the screen cap that Fire Phoenix posted here, where it says, and this is a quote from Robert Jordan, once it became clear what had happened, the opprobrium, I do not know that word. Opprobrium? A-P-P? O-P-P-R-O-B-R-I-U-M. The opprobrium increased, and Biedemon sought obscurity, finally committing suicide when he was unable to achieve it. Everyone knew his name and knew what he had done. He had nowhere to hide. Opprobrium. Harsh criticism or censure. Interesting. Robert Jordan teaching me new words, even outside of your books. Thank you very much. His vocabulary was insane.
Yeah, vilification, abuse, vituperation. Yeah, what a good word.
What a great word.
Yeah, because I would have just used the word vilification.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's interesting. That gives us a little more detail about that history, about they were blamed, and that's partially why he committed suicide, and it drove her to the Dark One, because if you're blamed for the worst tragedy in the history, it'd be impossible for you to get back into society. And if everyone knew who you were, no.
Yeah, you either embrace it or you run away from it, and
right.
They both did either of those things.
And Lanfear's not about to run away from anything and go off into obscurity. That's not going to happen. No.
That's the exact opposite of her character.
So I can see where maybe she dealt with that for a while and then was like, so, this source of power I released, how you doing? You owe me a favor? There's fighting in the Borderlands. We talked about this a little bit in the last chapter, but the sniffer, Huron, got back to the Borderlands, told them about Rand, and because of the prophecy, that started the 4 leaders on a march south, and because they couldn't explain it to anyone, there was definitely, like, battles going on and fighting.
Yeah, like, I find it hard to believe that there was actual warring between Shadar and Arafel.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it had more to do with them gathering troops and marching.
Right. And I think there may have been, like, disagreements, and there may have been a couple of duels.
Yeah, or there might have been a couple of skirmishes or something.
I think one character says, and I don't remember who, there were Borderlanders were having disagreements, and when Borderlanders have disagreements, they look like small battles to the rest of us. That was Neil Radio. Thank you. Of course, Neil is, probably spot on right there. Because, again, he knows the Borderlanders pretty well, and there's no real channelers involved in that. So there's nothing for him to distrust. Does Neil believe in Trollocs and Shadowspawn? I can't remember if he... Some of the White Cloaks don't, some of them do. I want to say he's familiar. Oh yeah, he thinks the whole last battle will be Trollocs and Dreadlords, right. So of course he believes in them. That's right. So after that, they talk a little bit about Rand's miracles, which we all know is just the Ta'veren twisting. And they attribute the good things to him, but don't mention the bad things that are also due to him. So they sort of give him the luck. And I actually think I talked about this in a episode a long time ago where we were trying to figure out, like, what sort of examples of Rand's Ta'veren twisting happen. And there's a paragraph here that's just fantastic. Every day there's another story about a child falling headfirst onto paving stones from a window 40 feet up without so much as a single bruise. Or a grandmother getting in the way of 24 runaway horses. Only somehow they don't even buffet her, much less knock her down and trample her. Some fellow threw 5 crowns, 22 times straight at dice the other day, and they lay that at your feet, too, luckily for him. And those are sort of the good things that they attribute to him, but then there's all these bad things that are happening at the same time that they didn't mention, right? The man who stumbled on a step and was hanged when his handkerchief caught on the door latch. The loose slate ripped from a roof by a high wind that sailed through an open window and a doorway to kill a woman sitting at a table with her family. That sort of thing did happen, but rarely.
God,
only such things were not rare around him.
The imagery of that particular description is just so wild to me. Like, I can picture that happening in my head, and it's just, like, traumatizing. Can you imagine experiencing that? Like, sitting down to eat dinner with your wife or your mother or your sister or something, and, like, a random shingle flies through the window and stabs her in the throat.
Or a bullet. Unfortunately, that happens too much. But yeah, the freak accident of the shingle where you think it's, like, totally safe. But, there's that risk, right? Like, there's random deaths happen, right? Like, recently Grant Umahara died from a brain aneurysm, which I'm sorry to tell you if you didn't know that. He was on Mythbusters at a fairly young age. And it's like, there's nothing we can do to control that, right? A brain aneurysm is completely random. And that's sort of the same sort of, there's a risk of random death just by being alive, right? Like, by walking around, something in your body could give out and you could drop dead right now. Or, a truck could jump the curb and hit you and you could be dead. Like, there's inherent risk in being alive, but we all have to accept some risk, to get up and move around because we're meat machines that can fall apart.
Right, yeah, we're meat with water and electricity inside us. We are prone to mistakes.
And, society, right. And we live in a world. We live in a society, right, that can kill us for very many reasons and random stuff. And we live in an infrastructure that can fall apart, or a bridge that can collapse, or...
Yeah, whether it be natural disaster or unforeseen circumstances or...
gun discharge randomly.
Right, or, just a shit health thing that had nothing to do with your actual state of health, like a brain aneurysm. Like, the chance of death is... every single day is a lot higher than people realize. Like,
right.
The amount of things that can kill you day to day, especially if you're commuting, you and I have talked about it a lot. Like,
right.
Being in a car is one of the most dangerous things you can do. But we see it as perfectly safe and perfectly normal part of our life.
And people even, like, text while they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is crazy to me, but I mean, we all do it. It's our brains can't stop, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I can't wait for self-driving cars. I think because we talk about the top 3 killers are cancer, heart disease, and car accidents. And now COVID, because COVID I think just overtook number 3.
Yeah, the 4 C's of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Cancer,
COVID.
car accidents, cardiac arrest, and COVID.
And then right after that, we get the saying. There was a saying in the Borderlands: duty is heavier than a mountain, death lighter than the feather. Which, of course, is not the first time we've heard this, by any means. It's almost... I would wonder how many times is the whole phrase actually said in the series. I bet it's less than you think, but still a lot.
Lan hits him with it a lot in the first book.
Yeah. And I think the second book, too.
I think that it's less that we hear people speak it aloud a lot. It's more that we can see that significance or the influence of that saying and that nugget of wisdom helps Rand make the choices he has to make or push through the struggles that he goes through. It's a super, super, super important thing to him. It's a little mantra that he kind of lives by in ways.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways you could say that, when the burdens of being the Dragon Reborn become too much, when that mountain becomes too heavy, he starts to seek the death because that's the relief from carrying all that weight.
Yeah, we get to see him go a little bit ishy on us.
Yeah, a little bit fatalistic and suicidal in some ways. It's hard to know. He wants to stay alive through the last battle, but then we can die.
Yeah, no, we totally see him prepared and almost eager to die and just be done with it at the last battle. He's so exhausted, he's so stressed out, he's so tired of everything.
His body is broken on multiple levels.
Yeah, he has given his blood, body, and soul to this cause that he never wanted or never expected. He was perfectly content to live the most boring, blasé farm husband life ever, and then turns out that he's the most important man of the entire age, and it was nothing like what he expected for his future. I couldn't imagine. I honestly couldn't imagine somebody coming up to me and telling me that
you're the savior of the world. You've heard Robert Jordan's quote that's what the inspiration was. Is what would it really be like if someone came up to you and tapped you on the shoulder and said, "You're the savior.
You're the savior of mankind."
Of mankind. What do you do? How do you get people together? What are the politics around that? How does that all work? That was the premise of this story.
Mm-hmm.
And to be it's not just going to be, all right, everybody, line up, let's go attack the orcs. That's not going to work, right? Lord of the Rings is, and that's why I have some criticism of Lord of the Rings. There's no contention on the same level, There's some, no.
They get overwhelmed and they get tired, but they're never Rand goes on an entire 2-book arch trying to find out if this is true or if he's being manipulated by an Aes Sedai.
What's true?
That he's the Dragon Reborn.
Oh, yeah, in the beginning.
After he channels at the Eye of the World, he goes off on that journey to Falma, and then from Falma to Tyr to confirm that he is the dragon. We didn't see that. Frodo was given the ring and was cool, let's just march into Mordor.
Right.
I mean, I kind of don't want to leave the Shire and all, but second breakfast or whatever.
I'm going on an adventure. Yay. Yeah. No, and there's an inherent love of adventure built into the Lord of the Rings, and I can see where that's very inspiring to people. This idea that it's time to step out of your hamlet and just experience the wider world and participate in it, and and be changed by it. There's a lot in Lord of the Rings about stepping onto roads and how when you come back you're never going to be the same. So there's a lot there that I think is nostalgic and wonderful and makes you feel good, but doesn't feel like necessarily a realistic character interaction to me.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things where there's no way, I could never go back home. I've lived in Portland for a year. I could never go back to my, backwater city. Even though it's not a small city, I could never go back to where I was living before. I would never feel like I belonged there after living in a city like Portland that's faster paced and more robust, and the way that Portland is, I can never go back to my overgrown farm city.
No, and that's what they talk about Rand is like the village shrinks or he grows, one or the other.
I lived in the fifth largest city in California. It's called Fresno, for those of you who know. And like it was basically a farm town in the Central Valley of California that, because of its location and its midway point between the Bay and Southern California, it just kind of became a big hub and a big agricultural center. But it's basically what would happen if a small big city met a small farm town. I love Rand's approach to justice here. Like, when he hears about the people in the city that are like doubting him or questioning whether or not he's actually the Dragon Reborn, being hung up and murdered, like, he's like, no, that's absolutely okay. Who did it? Were they taken? Have they been caught? Have they been imprisoned? If not, that needs to happen right now.
Which sets up a huge contrast with the Prophet, Massima, which we see up here. And he, again, setting up a future plot line, he thinks, I need to send someone to take care of him. And that's where he sends Perrin, post Dumai's Wells.
Mm-hmm.
So again, setting up that plot line that sends Perrin off on that whole journey, reuniting a whole army to bring back to the last battle. So I just love these little tidbits of like, just I feel like Jordan's saying like, I'm starting off these new plot lines here. Now that we're sort of back in Camlyn and like we sort of accomplished everything we need to accomplish to set up this War of Nations. He's got all the characters introduced, he's got all the pieces on the board, and now he's sort of starting the end game. I know now is way too early to like start the end game, but he's hinting at it. He's hinting at the plot lines that are going to take us to the last battle.
There's a lot of like seeding and foreshadowing going on.
Yes.
At this point already. Like, not even halfway through the series yet, and we're seeing a lot of the seeds planted for some of the final events of the series.
Why do you think the maidens are more scary to the women than the Aiel men?
Good question.
What I would assume is that there's some protection from the men, being like, the men probably won't hurt the women, but women just are willing, at least in this universe, women are often more willing to punish each other. Like, the women's circle is much harder on women who violate customs than the men's circle, right? There's just a lot of coming down on their own to police their own. And so I think that maybe they're just more scared of the women actually like being like, yo, you're pissing me off? Yeah, I will come after you. They're wrong, but, you know, because the maidens would never come after someone who didn't carry a spear.
Yeah, and like Iridia mentioned with like gender norms, I could totally see, like, even in this world where women are not nearly as like second class to men as they are in a lot of fantasy worlds or even timepieces or period pieces where, you know, people in this, the equivalent of this time period, women were borderline second class citizens, if not actual second class citizens. There's still some of that going on. Like, you know, they expect men to be protectors of the fairer sex, for lack of a better term. And
certainly in Camlyn, yeah.
Yeah, and certainly in Camlyn, even though they have a matriarchy in Camlyn, like, it's still men soldiers that protect their queen. And the thought of women who have no obligation to protect women because men are supposed to protect women being armed and dangerous soldiers is probably... Also because they probably just don't understand it. They just don't get it. Like, why are these women armed to the teeth and fighting? Like, it's such a backwards concept.
Women know how dangerous women can be. Deviko said that, and I like that. So it's like a combination of both that, like, it's out of order, and, like, how do I interact with these people, and are they going to treat me differently than a man would? Yeah.
And I think that, you know, people know how to deal with a male soldier. Like, male soldiers are not uncommon. Whereas, like, women, I could imagine that the women in the palace would know how to deal with male soldiers because they see the guards all the time and they interact with the guards regularly. And they know how to interact with other women that are also servants or potentially ladies or whatever the case may be. But how do they interact with a woman soldier? Just not knowing how you interact with those two things in one.
We have a little bit about the rebels. We hear about Adailan, who becomes the supporter of Elaine. He plays a little game of houses by having Lady Aramilla carry a letter, and Lady Aramilla, that comes back to bite him a little bit. Isn't she the one who...
She's the one who ends up having the most support against Elaine.
Right. Which I guess getting her out of Camlyn was a good idea, but... So Elaine eventually releases Aramilla and passes judgment on her crimes against the crown. She is stripped of all her titles and lands in Andor, but Elaine gives her land back in Cairhien. So she ends up as a Cairhienan noble.
And she gives some of their land to Cairhienan nobility.
Yes. She gives some of Lady Aramilla's land to the Cairhienan nobility. That's why she seizes it, is so she can pass it off to the Cairhienans.
Hers and, 4 of the other nobles that refused to abdicate or renounce their support for Aramilla.
Mm-hmm. The ones who were fighting on her side.
Elaine's campaign to win the crown that was hers anyways is one of the most impressive stories in this book series, in my opinion.
Yeah, you like the way that all comes together and is written?
I do. Elaine was born to the throne. She was the daughter heir. She was destined her entire life to take the throne. But because of everything that happened, because of Gabriel and all of that came into question, and people lost faith in Trikand, she was able to re-inspire that faith in her people. And rather than being a petulant brat like everybody likes to say she is, she was willing to fight tooth and nail to prove that she was both capable and deserving of that crown.
How do you feel about some of the foolish things she did under the Min?
Oh god, I'm not saying that she was perfect. Don't get me wrong. She was she definitely had her moments of idiocy. She definitely took some unnecessary risks. She definitely got herself into hot water. She definitely is a 18-year-old girl who is overconfident with her own power. Not authority power, but her ability with the one power. Being as strong and as capable of a channeler as she is, plus having men's blessings that her babies will be born safely. She gets that sort of youthful invincibility, delusional stuff that I think a lot of young people experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that realistically, had everything not gone south the way that it had, she would have been able to do that by doing stupid things like riding her horse at a gallop through the woods and disobeying her governess and whatever other dumb things she might have gotten into. The way that teenagers and young adults get into trouble and stuff long before she ever took the crown and long before she was ever supposed to actually be responsible for her country.
That is a good point. This is super early for her to be taking her crown. Her mother was still young at the height of her power. There was no expectation that Elaine would have to take over the throne soon. Even
though Morghese was not a powerful channeler by any measure, her almost non-existent access to the one power was definitely still enough to lengthen her lifetime. According to everything that I've read, Morghese could have easily lived to be 120.
She was definitely slowed. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, absolutely. She already looks more youthful than she actually is because of her ability with the one power.
So we discovered the secret of Queen Elizabeth II. She's just a very weak channeler.
She's just a very weak channeler.
That would make more sense. That explains a lot, actually. So, and there's also Elizabeth II is older than any other living monarch, but Louis XIV had a longer reign, so he must have taken the throne at a younger age, so he had more time as ruler.
You know what's extra super wild to me is that Elizabeth II was never really supposed to be the queen. I know that people don't like the English monarchy. I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by the English monarchy and English nobility and the way that they have adapted to the modern world. I just had a big, let me watch Downton Abbey from season 1 until the end thing recently, and it was kind of fun. Oh god, and the Crown is so good. I've seen all of it that's out, and I'm looking forward to the next season.
How was the movie, by the way?
The movie was good for Downton Abbey. It was good. I expected a little bit more from it, but they were just kind of wrapping up some of the stuff that they hinted at.
Gotcha. It's, I think ending a series is one of the hardest things to do, which is one of the reasons Wheel of Time is so amazing, because it has such an incredible ending, which is hard to do. There's a lot to tangent on because there's so many this is one of those chapters where there's a lot of hints of future things happening.
Yeah.
So each sentence has a whole plot line that we could talk about that goes off about it, or we can just sort of mention them and keep going. So we did Lady Aramilla. Oh, there's the Yeah, Marilyn Gamalfin is in the city. She's the Aes Sedai who likes cats, the black one, and she was just given secret orders by the Forsaken to go do something that we never figure out, but we assume that this Aes Sedai in the city who's up to no good is her. As far as I know, we don't get any confirmation of that. If someone has any ideas about why she's there or what she does, that would be awesome. Also, stereotype about Aes Sedai and cats, right? They love them. The cats like them. So that could just be any Aes Sedai, because Aes Sedai kind of attract cats. But, she in particular has been mentioned as the Aes Sedai who takes care of and loves cats.
She's definitely the crazy cat lady Aes Sedai / Black Hajla's sister.
We have 2 Aes Sedai arriving in the night, who we know are Varen and Alanna. And I assume they're arriving in the night just because they were traveling with the girls. They tried to get there in time. Well, they got in Whitebridge. They heard that the White Tower might be split, so they were rushing to get to Camlyn to confirm it. So I think that's what they arrived in the night. They were in the night. They were just trying to get information as quickly as possible. And so he basically takes a visit. He's got the Fat Man Angriel in his pocket, which is his gun, his power sink, because he doesn't know who they are and he doesn't trust them, which he shouldn't. And so he's wandering around and he almost runs into Aviendha. And at that point, he's like, ooh, you know what? I got to get out of the palace. Let's go visit those Aes Sedai. It's entirely because he's avoiding Aviendha. It's amazing how many of his movements around the beginning of this book are based in him seeing Aviendha or trying to avoid Aviendha. She was all tangled in his head with his dreams, and his dreams with Elaine, and even Min.
Yeah, the fact that Rand hasn't quite sorted out that he's in love with 3 women at this point is kind of fun to me.
Well, we haven't quite got much interaction with Min. She's more of a crush at this point.
This is true, yeah. But he definitely knows that he was catching feelings for Elaine.
Absolutely.
And he knows that he was catching feelings for Aviendha.
Well, certainly I should hope so at this point.
Right, yeah.
There was the igloo. And so, but he hasn't really had a chance for his feelings to develop for Min. But he sort of... She's in there in his dreams, but the even Min, that seems weird, It's like, yeah, you got a crush.
You got a crush. His capital D dreams.
Right.
I mean, but like capital D dreams could also be like dreams that happen in Teller and Riyadh. Like that's such a loaded word in this series.
Right. Well, we know at this point he's so heavily warded, his dreams are all his own. There's nothing, he says nothing can get in, but also what's in there I can't keep out. So he still has nightmares, but they're his own dreams. I noticed Lewis Theron starts talking about Ilyena when Rand starts thinking about the women he loves. Just a sweet little thing that goes around there.
Yeah, I love to see Lewis Theron pop up, because with Lewis Theron it's either like absolute madness or it's absolute useful insanity.
I often think of it as an outlet for Rand's emotions that he doesn't want to admit he's having. Right? Like, right here, he's like, he doesn't want to admit that he loves these 3 women, and then Lewis Theron pops up and talks about, killing women. And it's like, dude, if you just were able to admit to yourself that you loved all 3 women, you wouldn't have this madman in your head. You need to reconcile yourself and your emotions.
And I think that can be said for almost any of the internal struggles that Rand has. Lewis Theron tends to manifest, or the voice of Lewis Theron tends to manifest in his head when he's having the biggest internal struggles or repressing the most.
You push something down hard enough, you can get a little insanity popping out the side. Oop, gotta put that back in.
I love Aviendha. She's honestly all of my favorite characters in this book are actually like female characters. Like
sure.
Aviendha, Elaine, Egwene, Nynaeve.
I really love the Aviendha-Elaine friendship. Like, when the 2 of them are hanging out, that's my favorite Aviendha. Like, because Maiden Aviendha, like, when she's with the Aiel, she's Aiel. She's either the maiden or the wise one. And, like, she sort of conforms, but when you take her out of her comfort zone and put her in the wetlands and make her, like, hang out with wetlanders, then she becomes interesting to me.
Yeah.
And much more, so like I said, my favorite of hers with Elaine, not with Rand. Like, Aviendha and Rand, like, I get that what she's doing is, like, and she has these emotions, and she's all torn up inside, but she's just so subservient to the wise ones that I'm just like, okay, come on. I want a little more independent Aviendha. And I think that that's fucking fantastic when she, like, is on the ship and doing things and tossing fireballs. She does all sorts of great stuff.
Yeah, no, and she's another one who's just ridiculously talented and very powerful. Like, she's just innately talented.
And then there's a bit of humor where the Bashir and the Aiel are commenting on Rand's running away from Avienda. A young man chases shadows and runs from moonlight, and in the end, he stabs himself in the foot with his own spear, which I think spear has a dual meaning there. And then one of my favorite lines here is, irritated, Rand looked over his shoulder. Neither of you would look well in a dress. Because earlier he'd been like, if you're going to do matchmaking, these women are going to do matchmaking, they can stay here and wear a dress. And here he's got these guys out, like, trying to matchmake again, and he's like, you're acting like women. Which is just, it's a very Aiel joke, right? The, like, you can go wear a dress because you're acting like someone who's playing matchmaker, which is very, in this society, very women-focused, because women pick the men. So the women are,
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of gender roles in this book, and it's
which is most societies have gender roles.
Yeah,
like that
absolutely.
is true to the world. Like, and we can wish there was a little more fluid.
No, it's absolutely
but
true to most of history and to the world that we live in now. That gender roles and gender norms are a thing, and while that is changing, and the binary of that is losing all shape, it's still a very real thing.
And what I think about Jordan's world is the gender norms are different in different countries.
Yeah.
And that's something, like, often gender norms are different in a fantasy novel, but they, like, pick one other gender norm, or one other society. And it's like, that society is different than our society, and let's compare them. With Robert, and that's, like, obviously that book is talking about that particular kind of society. Robert Jordan's like, yeah, here's 12.
Right.
Enjoy. And you're like, whoa, okay, what do you believe? Like, and that's why I've never, ever, ever associated any particular culture with Robert Jordan's belief, unlike some other authors, Terry Goodkind, who very clearly displays his politics in his books. Robert Jordan is telling you a story of how things happened, and each different world and each different country is going to display politics custom to its particular history. And, like, it blows my mind. I love the way he does that.
No, he does a really good job at writing characters. Like, it's one of the things that I love the most about The Wheel of Time is the depth of character and the depth of culture, and, like, nobody is really two-dimensional, and nothing about this story is two-dimensional.
No, not the cities, not the culture, not the people, not the magic system. Every time I reread this book, you discover new layers, new ideas, new... And because he's created this three-dimensional space, you can sort of look at it from a different angle and see something completely different, even though it's, like, made up of all the same, lines on paper. And I love how complex this thing is, because...
It's fun to talk about, and it's fun to reread, and there's always something to discover.
I'm like, here, this line, the few occasions he found to enjoy anything were precious. And I'm like, that's a danger sign, man. Like, if you like, walking down a street is, like, the enjoyment you get out of life, and that's about it, like, maybe you need to step back a little bit and figure out where you are and not be so stressed out and not, maybe destroy the world.
I love how people in Camlyn don't recognize Rand yet.
I mean, to be honest, for a lot of the series, he's not that recognizable. Like, the common people don't really see him. Like,
no, he spends way too much time wrangling the nobility and the other leaders so he can try to designate tasks.
And traveling from palace to palace. Like, when you literally don't have to leave palaces to rule the countries. It's very easy to, go from the Stone to the palace in Camlyn.
Sun Palace in Kyrie, and the Palace of Camlyn doesn't really have a name other than the Royal Palace and then the Stone of Tyr.
I'm actually sweating right now. It's hot.
Yeah, no, it's hot in here too. I'm actually starting to
yeah.
sweat a little bit, even with the window open. It's also like 80 degrees and raining, so it's just muggy as shit.
Yeah, that's the real thing. Is like, just I'm sweating here, sitting here, because the humidity has come in, and just, whew, I can drink the air in front of me. Yeah, I got spit on when I was going to pick up some stuff from some envelopes and stuff.
Just the lead drizzle.
Yeah. It's like almost evaporating before it hits the ground type rain. Like, it's not doing shit to water the plants or anything.
Yeah, which just means that water is falling, touching the ground, and evaporating and falling again. It's just like so muggy. There's so much water in the air. Like, one of the reasons I'm so excited for the show is to see some of these places brought to life, like the Ogier built cities. Just like Robert Jordan makes them sound so beautiful without ever actually telling us what they look like. So it's going to be fun to see artists take that and make these cities.
I'm curious to see how they go about that. Like, how much of that's going to be post-production, how much of that's going to be set design, how much of that's going to be, just really talented painters, and designers. Someone's got to design all this stuff. And, like, the little hints I've gotten here and there have me excited, but Kremlinology at its finest is going on here with the TV show. Like, we've gotten casting, and that's pretty much it. One or two little leaked pictures that I don't want to look at anyway. So, casting and directing, we're all craving more real-time TV show content. Rafe, give us something. Sure,
Rafe.
A trailer.
Like, as excited as I am about all of the casting announcements, like, I get a little thrill with every single one, but I want something meatier, man.
And we got the Min casting and the Swan casting today, which are great. The one question I do have is, because they introduced Suan with the blue eye quote, are they going to give her blue eyes in the show? Are they going to CGI it? Are they going to do contacts? Or are they just going to... Or was that just a quote that they picked up?
Yeah, I imagine, like, there's something there. Like, you don't use that particular descriptor of Swan for that particular actress, like, without having a plan of mixing those two things together. Like, I'm super hopeful that they're going to give her blue contacts. Like, as much as all of the other casting has been shredded by people on Facebook, I haven't been bothered by any of it until Swan, because Swan has a very, very, very precise description, and the actress that they picked is nothing like that. But that doesn't mean that I don't like the choice. Like, I think she's a brilliant actress, and she's going to do a great job.
No, and looking at her acting history, I'm blown away. Both her and Min.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, once again, you just see them pick just some of the best actors, actresses, directors. I think what we see today, that the person who's working on the last two episodes did Altered Carbon.
Yeah, Altered Carbon and Vikings.
So, I mean, just a fantastic just range of people, and the salty people on the internet shouldn't bother you. So, let's move on from that.
Yeah.
Let's get to the inn. And he walks into Varen and Alanna having basically raided the Two Rivers for a treasure trove of girls.
Yeah, and Varen and Alanna aren't actually in the inn when he walks in, which I always forget that. Like,
oh, that's right.
They come in behind him while he's talking to the girls.
Yeah, and so he's getting stories of home, and he's enjoying, again, these little moments of pleasure, right? He basically gets to reminisce about having home and what's changed and seeing all the craziness. And these people just think he's Rand, maybe he's earned some money, but it's still just Rand, right? He's got a nice coat and everything.
Yeah. I mean,
but he left with Aes Sedai.
Exactly. I mean, they've heard that he came up in the world, but, like,
sure,
none of them know that he's the Dragon Reborn.
No.
After all of the time that Perrin spent in the Two Rivers, like, none of them know that he's the Dragon Reborn.
No, and they've been hearing stories about the Dragon Reborn, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that news has gotten to the Two Rivers.
And if not, it's definitely gotten to the places that they've been through since leaving.
So I went through all the list of names of these girls. The vast majority of them we only ever see in this scene. There are a few exceptions. Obviously, Bodwin Cawthon we see is Matt's sister, and we see her do the Quendiar, and she's going to do the Quendiar chain, but then Egwene replaces her because she doesn't feel it's right to have an apprentice do it. And
she's actually pretty talented with it. She's not as good as Egwene, but she's actually fairly talented at making Quendiar.
Right. And as a pretty powerful channeler. She's like up there with the like Codswain level power.
Yeah, she's definitely got the potential to be a high-ranking Aes Sedai.
And then Larine Ayelen pops up a few more times. Not a lot. She becomes part of the same family as Nicola and covers Nicola's escape, and then sort of asks Egwene for clemency, and Egwene says no. So she does sort of pop up again. But that's the only other time we see her. It just is like...
Is it Swan that tells Egwene that she could grant clemency to that whole family and spare a couple of the Two Rivers girls?
Yes, I think so. Oh, is it Shiriam?
It might be Shiriam.
Yeah, Shiriam's like, you could, because she's trying to stir up some shit. She's basically trying to undermine Egwene by, like, having her engage in cronyism. And cronyism is bad, folks. Don't put your son-in-law in charge of shit.
Yeah, I love how just excited all of the girls are. It's such a throwback to the beginning of the book, early Egwene, or the beginning of the series and, like, early Egwene, where, like, they're just so excited to, like, be going to Tarvalin and training to become Aes Sedai, and the world is this big oyster, and they're going to open it and find those pearls, and little do they know that they're all about to get chokeslammed by the Dragon Reborn.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, remember those days when, like, Perrin and Rand got up and they were so excited, like, we're in a city, a real city, and Matt's, like, laying in bed because his head hurts because he's got the dagger issue and stuff, and, like, they're so excited. And this does take you back, and just to see that contrast of how far he's come and how hard he's become and how kind of powerful he's become in this very short time.
Yeah, capable and powerful in such a short amount of time. Like, they're only, a year out of the Two Rivers at this point?
Year and a half at this point, I think. Yeah. Coming up on 2 years as we get to the end of winter. Winter. We're coming up on winter night, which will be 2 years. Even though it's hot, it should be cold. I love Rand's reaction. Wait, to them talking about Perrin? Wait, Lord Perrin? And then so we hear a lot about how Two Rivers is changing. This is actually great. This is a time when people are communicating with each other. It's like, so many times people are like, just talk to each other. And it's like, oh, look, people are actually talking to each other. Things are happening. I really like that. It seems Perrin had married Fael. They all like Fael. Fane was there. Not sure he's dead. Of course he's not. Just a lot of little... This is basically a recap chapter. We're still early enough in this book that we're sort of getting a recap of, like, Perrin. And also Perrin wasn't in the last book. And so having this recap of what he's been up to and what's happened in the meantime is really important for, I think, the readers. But, I'll leave you to finish that exercise on your own time, as my professors used to say. Go read the book, go read the recap.
Yeah. I mean, we spent a whole book away from Perrin and everything that went down in the Two Rivers, and it is a good opportunity to catch up on some of that. It's also really interesting to see how Aes Sedai everywhere are trying to learn as much as they possibly can about Rand and the person that is the Dragon Reborn. Like, in the next chapter, we see Nynaeve get interrogated by Dolana and the other Aes Sedai. And it's just like everybody is trying to find out as much as they can about Rand. And we see here that the girls have been pestered relentlessly by Alanna and Varen about what they know of Rand as well.
Well, and think about it. He is the most powerful person in the world probably right now. And it's not like we have the daily news. Like, everyone wants to find out, like, what does he think? What is he like? What is he going to do? What is he, what are his goals? Like, there's just rumors and word of mouth. There's no news channels, there's no radio, there's no television. It's just... Yeah.
And they all want to know what kind of person the fate of the world is resting on.
And I said I want to, know what he's going to do and then manipulate him into doing something different too. So
yeah, there's that.
We get a mention of Celia Cole, who wanted to be tested but was too old. She does eventually get in when they open up the novice books, when Egwene opens them up, so she also joins the ranks.
Does she travel there on her own, or is she recruited again in another... Because I know that Varen and Alanna were also setting up to send for more of the girls as they got older.
I think that might just be a fact from the companion, because I'm looking at the wiki and it's in there, but I don't remember her coming back. So I think it's probably, if you read her summary in the companion, it says, and she joined the tower and became a novice when the book opened up. But I don't think that's in the series, because the notes say she's only in this chapter. So there are little details like that in the companion that can occasionally pop up in the wiki that I'm like, I mean, there's no way we could have known that from reading the book, other than checking the companion.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of fun details in the companion that are definitely not in the book. They're just inferred from Robert Jordan's notes.
Right. And, the fate, like, I'm okay with her, like, yeah, we never hear from her again, but she went on to do something, and that something could have been joining the novice when it was opened up, because that's what she wanted to do. That makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
That's 100% fine with me. you don't need to include the fate of every single character in the books. People come into your life and you don't find out what happens to them.
Especially a character that's literally mentioned one time to add depth and personality, but isn't an actual significant player.
Rounding out the two rivers and everything. So in come Alanna and Varen, saying, "We're not going to Tar Valon just yet." Alanna walks in as if she has been crying, which I assume is over her dead warder. She's still sort of in mourning. But we have to start talking about the bonding of Rand, because that happens in this chapter.
Yeah, that's coming up.
And so we have to talk about Alanna's state of mind. And I've floated this idea before, and, some people can argue with me that Alanna's been in a vulnerable emotional state, and she trusts Varen, and we see Varen use compulsion on people. And I know Varen is very surprised by Alanna's actions, and that really seems to counteract that argument. But at the same time, it's just such a good opportunity. And Varen's such a good actor. Is it possible? Is it possible that Varen put some compulsion on Alanna that led her?
I don't think so. I think that Aradia's right. She used very human manipulation, not magical compulsion. I don't think that she did in this case. One, she's not good at compulsion. Her compulsion that she has stitched together is very crude and very time-consuming, and is not something that I think Alanna would have been subjected to without, especially because she spends so much time with Varen, without being aware that something was off. I don't think that that's what happened. I think that Varen is also very clever and very crafty and very observant, and was able to exploit Alanna's state of mind and vulnerability because she just lost her warder. And apparently there was talk of Alanna bonding Perrin. She talks about at the end of this chapter, or the beginning of the next chapter, why did you do it? Well, all three of them should have been bonded ages ago. And
Right.
The only reason she didn't bond Perrin apparently is because
Fail.
Fael threatened her life if she did, and Fael doesn't really know how the warder bond works, so Alanna was not trying to risk it, even though she probably could have handled it. It just wasn't worth it. So I think that that's a huge factor.
The other factor is the first question she asks, which is, where's Matt? Because she wants to bond one of the three. Perrin's ruled out. Matt's gone. That leaves Rand.
Right. And Varen probably never said anything to dissuade Alanna from bonding the boys.
And may have even suggested it was a good idea.
Yeah, may have implied some of the benefits of having them as warders in an Aes Sedai's control. I think that Alanna has talked about it enough with Varen that now that she is face to face with that decision and that opportunity, it's almost, she's probably talked it up enough and whatever else that not taking that opportunity while Varen is right there would seem like cowardice that she would have to explain later.
And don't forget, they think this is going to give them complete control over him, right?
Right.
Because
she totally thinks she can use the bond to control.
Right. It's basically compelling him. And, she thinks that's helpful, but it's not, and this is where we sort of have to talk about, this bonding is rape, right? This is an uncontrolled, this is someone getting into your head, taking all of your emotions. This is someone who, at least in her opinion, he's able to resist, but thought she could compel you to take actions that you don't want to take. And she did it to him without asking.
What do you think Moiraine would have done?
Oh, she was disgusted. Well, what it would have done when?
If she had been there. If Rand had Moiraine with him while Alanna did that. If she was part of his entourage. How do you think?
First of all, I don't think Moiraine would have let Alanna do whatever she did. She wouldn't have let her touch him. She would have been like, I got it. He's healed. And second of all, she would have seen the weaves and stopped them. The warder bond is not a quick weave, right? It's not instant. You have to form it, and they're not doing it inverted. Varen saw what was coming.
No, yeah. They don't know how to invert their weaves yet. And, yeah, no, she didn't try to hide it at all. She was probably weaving the weave for the bond as she was also delving him. Because he does definitely get delved. But I think that she was doing a light delving to buy time while she wove the bond.
Exactly. I think it was both, right? She's delving him both to see.
Yeah, if he needs healing before she bonds him.
And also just she can tell he's exhausted. He's worn to the edge of his abilities. He has very little reserves left. And that's the other thing. We counteract the incredible invasiveness of the bonding with the strength and ability to go without sleep and just physical endurance that being a warder gives him, that allows him to almost in a way tap into the power of the female half of the true source by being a warder. And how much does that save his life when he's in the box? How much does that keep him going through the rest of the series?
Yeah, well, definitely the bond. Alanna's bond to him played a big part in his rescue.
Sure, it was the way they tracked him down.
I wonder how much he really got out of the bond, though, because he already has a connection, a direct connection to the One Power. Does he actually get strength and stuff from it, or does he not really get as much of that benefit as a non-magical warder?
I think he's driving himself so freaking hard that if he didn't have the warder bond, he would have collapsed way sooner. You know, because he's up reading all night, he's commanding people, like, he's constantly moving, he's constantly doing stuff, he's constantly complaining about not having enough time. Yeah. And there looks like there is some evidence from Robert Jordan that the warder bond is partly responsible for him, recovering from healing quicker. And
yeah, no, that's a good point. Like, Genghis Khan in the Discord chat is like, it's kind of like the mere reaction to male rape. He gains so much from this and should be happy from it. The guy should be happy it happened. Like, yeah, I wonder how much this can be equated to the rape analogy that we get so often with Aes Sedai forcing bonds on men, because, Rand is a very powerful channeler. He's less helpless against that than a regular man would be. I'm not saying that to justify it. It was still absolutely uncool of Alanna to do it, and there's no changing that or justifying that. But I wonder if it's quite the same dynamic. Little nuance there.
He's managed to mitigate some of the effects by channeling, and he's able to get away from her so that her influence is pretty minor.
Mm-hmm.
He spends a lot of the time far away from her, just deliberately to minimize her presence in his head. And the thing is, like, yeah, Arada's asking, if it's what it had to be? I don't think it had to be Alanna, and it's certain, like, come on, give him Egwene, let him bond her, let him bond, hell, even Elaine, like, sorry, did I say Egwene?
You did.
Let him bond Elaine, or even Egwene, right? Like, a warder bond between Egwene and Rand, can you think of the two of them going into the final battle warder bonded?
Two of the most powerful channelers, like, just so much there. And, like, the amount of understanding that they could have had of one another if they were bonded to each other.
Like, in the similar way that Pavara and Andral were bonded?
Yeah. To be able to, like, have... With a one-way bond, you have some, like, emotional insight to your bondmate. But with the double bond like that, you can actually pick up on their thoughts and even train that up to the level of, like, telepathic conversations.
Right, so and that was something that was being discovered because, Andral and Pavara did a dual bond, and there were other people who were following up on that and doing what they had done. And can you imagine if that was like, if Rand had been bonded to Egwene early on for various reasons, and then, like, as that it was discovered you could gain these abilities, he turned around and used the marriage bond on her. Now, unfortunately, it's because it's the marriage bond, it's got these other weird effects, and it wouldn't work because he's not in a relationship with her, and it sort of implies that you need to be, because you are so emotionally close to that person, they're almost not separated from you.
Yeah.
And so Egwene isn't the right person for him to do that with, but can you imagine how awesome that battle would be? The two of them holding arms, bonded as one person, fighting the Dark One?
Yeah, just incredible. Like, had it been Egwene who went with him instead of Nynaeve?
Sure. Egwene and Moraine?
Yeah.
As his support?
It's crazy to think about how different things could have turned out if just one little detail like that was different. You know what I mean? Like, one small thing, like it being Egwene that he was bonded to instead of Elaine. Like, if he had bonded the Amerlin seat or been bonded by the Amerlin seat as a thing of state or power or necessity rather than the bond of love and passion that he has with Elaine and the other two.
I just still bring up the other two because Avienda is not Aes Sedai, so she doesn't have the warder bond, and Min is not a channeler. So the reverse bond wouldn't quite work. I mean, I guess you could teach Aviendha that bond, but yes, they're as part of the 3 bond. Yeah, but I'm thinking like if there was like an early on situation where someone else bonded him at this point.
Oh yeah. She doesn't know the warder bond. She doesn't have it at this point.
Not that she ever learns it, because someone else bonds her to Rand, right? She's part of that bonding.
She does it too. So the circle, it's them both in a circle. Elaine weaves the bond around herself and Rand, and then around Aviendha and Rand, and Min and Rand, and then passes it to Aviendha, who then does the same thing and weaves it around everybody else, and then sets it up.
Okay. I didn't remember that passing. I thought it was all Elaine.
No, that was a fun scene. That's one of my favorite scenes in the book, is how that goes down. Favorite things in this series.
So then we sort of have the incident where he goes alone into a room with 2 powerful Aes Sedai. I assume Alanna leaves her warders behind because she knows what she's going to do. Yeah. And she wants Rand to leave his folks behind because they would stab her.
Got her, yeah.
Yeah, like that's, she's... And Varen must be in on it, right? This startled as if pulled from a deep thought. Yeah, right, Varen's paying attention to every freaking moment.
I don't necessarily think that Varen knew that it was going to happen right then and there. She may have had an inkling that Alanna might try something, but I don't think that they'd planned it out ahead of time. It's just not the impression that I've ever had.
I always want Varen to be in on it. That's, I guess, it's my own prejudice coloring what I want to see, because I want Varen to be part of this. I want this to be a Black Hotjaw plot. Because, it's used by Moradin at the end to make Rand vulnerable. And, part of me wants to go, Moradin ordered Varen to get Rand bonded to an Aes Sedai, report back who it was to orchestrate that. That to me makes so much sense. And Varen and Alanna spend so much time together. It's dude, Varen could be doing anything, whether it's talking to her, convincing, or just talking, or whether it's, getting her with that little bit of compulsion and that.
I think that Varen is in on the idea of it. She never stood in the way of it. She didn't stand in the way of it when it was Perrin on the questioning board, and she didn't stand on the way of it when the opportunity came for Rand. In fact, she offered herself up to a link the moment that the bond went into place, because she saw that Rand was going to react poorly to that.
And she was definitely not part of the link beforehand because she didn't want to be part of the bond.
Her talking to Alanna about the benefits of having these boys bonded enabled and emboldened Alanna's thoughts and plans for that. I don't think she ever magically compelled it, but her lack of condemnation and her, I want to say support. I don't know if support's quite the right word. I think she did support it, if only by not opposing it.
Yeah. And she's right there with an explanation, right? What did you do? She bonded you, Varen said quickly, but if her serenity had been ruffled, it cloaked her again in an instant. She bonded you as one of her warders. That is all.
Oops.
Which is not harm. We talked about the definition of harm. Clearly Alanna thinks she's not harming him, right? She thinks this is good for him, even though it ends up being something that nearly kills him.
Yeah, and it did harm him. It harmed him greatly. He lost so much trust and security because of the situation.
Yeah, and when she's saying harm, she's entirely talking about physical harm.
Yep.
And is not taking any mental harm into account.
Do you hear Ralph?
Yeah.
He's dreaming.
Is he twitching on
He's on the couch twitching, yeah.
Oh. Get that little guy.
He didn't get to go to the park today, so he's dreaming about it instead.
That's true, yeah, we did a short walk. Here, all Rand felt from Lewis Theron was a stunned sense of shock. That's because that's what Rand is feeling is shock. That is just... And then he thinks about Lan, which is, I guess, would have been a good ally to have.
Aradia, why do you bring that up, just out of curiosity? Lewis Theron Telemon has no idea what a bond is. I also think that he's kind of silent about it at this point. Yeah, Lewis Theron. I mean, he knows about the warder bond. He has to know about the warder bond.
I mean, that's the question. How much does LTT, the voice in LTT's head, see what's going on through Rand? I mean, we assume it's the voice in Rand's head, so he sees it all, and he understands. My assumption is if LTT is a voice in Rand's head, he would understand what the warder bond is. If he's not, then he wouldn't.
But it's also fair to say, like you mentioned earlier, that Lewis Theron Telamon in Rand's head is really just a manifestation of all of the feelings that Rand is repressing.
Sure.
And he is repressing that shock and that helplessness and that betrayal. And that you can see that manifested in two ways. You can see that in his backlash against them as he slams a shield on both of them, full of the power and linked, and goes off on them. And you can see it reflected in the absolute loss for words of Lustet and Telamon in his head.
Well, and I think you can say he is going into shock, not just shocked. Like, he's literally going into shock, and in order to prevent himself from freezing up, he pushes all of that onto LTT.
Mm-hmm. Compartmentalizes it so he can not deal with it, or deal with it by not dealing with it.
Which, and again, getting back to the rape analogy, is often how a lot of rape victims deal with it, is they compartmentalize, lock it away, and just try not to think about it, which is not super healthy, I don't think.
Or blame themselves, which you see a little bit of self-blame here with Rand as well, where he's like, and I walked into it like a
Right. Right? I trusted them. I'm an idiot. I trusted them.
Moraine told me never to trust an Aes Sedai. My mother told me never to trust a man. I have nobody to blame but myself.
What was he wearing when she bonded him?
I was so just going to say something along those same lines. Well, if you didn't want to get bonded by an Aes Sedai, maybe you shouldn't have been wearing a sword.
Right. Clearly. And, you wanted a border bond. Clearly.
It's good for you.
Yeah.
It's good for you. You'll thank me for this later. Yeah, that's another one. Ugh.
Oh.
Yeah. Like, okay, I have to be completely honest. Alanna is one of my favorite characters. Again, she's a strong, fiery, driven, capable female character.
I might argue about the capable part.
I think that she's very capable. I just also think that she made a lot of really bad choices. She's one of those people with a lot of potential. And her really big bad choice was this. And because of this, she lost a lot of the opportunities that she would have because she lost trust amongst the sisters.
Mm-hmm. Well, and she became a tool to find Rand rather than a person.
Exactly. She became a link to Rand and nothing more because she was no longer trustworthy to Rand or to the sisters, which the sisters would have rather had her with Rand's trust than with a bond, because then he would have confided in her and so on and so forth. But,
And if the bond had worked, if she'd actually been able to control him, which she tries to do right here. I think it says Alanna opened her mouth, but he wrote over her. I think right there, she's trying to rein him in with the bond, and he's just being like, nope.
Yeah, and I think that there's a certain magical effect to that as well. Like, she's probably also pushing on the compulsion side of the bond to, like, silence and calm him, and it's just not working. And she may have also been going to give a command, but she probably didn't. She probably didn't need the
Yeah, well, I assume she was giving the command already through the bond, right? Just she was opening her mouth and like she's so surprised that he just rides over her because she thinks she's going to be able to stop him at this point.
Right, and I think that has to do less with his will and more with the fact that he's a male channeler, and this bond works slightly different on male channelers because we see that with the other Aes Sedai, that bond, Ashaman, that they
being able to touch the power protects you from the compulsion of the water bond.
Yes. I think that the Aes Sedai figured out a way to make a bond that allows for compulsion, or at least had thought about it. I think I remember hearing something about that, or reading something about that, but it's been a while.
Oh, I think it's just, like, it's rarely used these days, but it's still in the bond.
Right, but I mean, a bond for men who can channel, like the Aes Sedai talk about a bond for men who can channel that actually allows them to use the compulsion that they would be able to use on a regular. Does Pavara try to compel Andril?
Yes, right when she bonds him immediately.
And it totally doesn't work.
And it totally doesn't work. Yeah, it's definitely a product of being able to channel.
She doesn't shield him, Obscure. She tries to, even linked together. Because Varen and... Oh, Pavara. I thought you were talking about Alanna. Yeah, no, she shields him.
Because Andrel's weak in the power.
Because Andrel's very weak in the power. But he can still touch the power. Like, he's still touched by Saidin. I don't think that just because he can't touch it directly right then and there, his makeup is still that of a man with access to the power. So it doesn't...
Right. And in the same way that we see Moraine say that just because she can touch the power, it gives her some protection from the eye of the Dark One.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if she's shielded. She still has that protection.
Morghese almost never channels, but she still has the extra lifespan and the slowing.
And perhaps some resistance to compulsion. Like, that might be part of how she got out, is that light channeling ability. Well, we see compulsion work just fine on Aes Sedai, so I guess that's straight compulsion is not the same as the bond.
Right, yeah, no, I would definitely say that straight compulsion. Morghese is able to beat the compulsion from Gabriel because she's strong-willed and strong-minded. I think that has less to do with her ability to channel. I hate calling it that because it almost isn't that.
Right. Her ability to touch the truth's power every once in a while.
Right. Her connection to the source has less to do with her breaking Gabriel's compulsion or Raven's compulsion than her own strength of will does.
So then he comes back out, kind of, I would assume, pretty traumatized.
Yeah, just shaken.
Yeah, totally shaken. And then Bode basically confronts him and is like, this man says you're the devil. I mean, the dragon reborn. And he's like, yeah, I am. And they go nuts. They go a little,
Don't even joke about that, Rand.
Yeah.
That's not funny.
And then there's this basically confrontation where and he's done this a couple of times with, like, Elaine. Remember when he melted the statue and wove a golden cloth out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, this sort of reminds me of that. There's a little bit of that sort of insanity. Not so much insanity because he's insane, but the pressure is just making him crack. And he's just a little frantic and a little bipolar, and having just come out of an incredibly traumatizing situation, he overreacts. And, like, this is also very traumatizing, right? He's losing his childhood friends.
Mm-hmm.
These people who he grew up with are learning that he is essentially a terrible person and is going to do terrible things to the world. And they just, like, can't believe that he... it's like they're finding out he's the rapist, right? After he just got raped. It's like... It's that one, too, of, like, you got taken advantage of, and then you're being accused of being the instigator and the bad person in that situation, and all the people around you are shunning you.
Yeah, and it's such a thing as well, because, like, he was just literally moments ago just talking to these people fondly of home.
Mm-hmm.
And in minutes it goes from these are old friends and acquaintances of mine to these people are both terrified and angry at me for things completely outside of my control.
And then he sort of justifies a little bit, like, well, that's good for them. I don't want them to get in trouble for being a friend of mine. I'm glad they're terrified of me now. And that's such a, like, terrible excuse. It's the same thing he does with Aviendha, the same thing he does with Elaine, which is, I'm dangerous, I'm awful, you should stay away from me.
Let me push you away.
Right. He's pushing away everybody he actually cares about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's super heartbreaking to see that, because, like, these are people that care about him. He's best friends with Matt, but, like, I'm pretty sure that Bode was familiar with him because of her relationship to Matt.
Oh, God, yeah, they must have spent a ton of time. You always know your best friend's little siblings. You might not like them very much, but you know them pretty goddamn well.
Right. And after spending so long away from them and being so long away from home, they are a piece of that. And, like, to see them and to lose them like this, and to just lose all of the trust and faith and comfort that you had with this last little sliver of home. It's just like, I can only imagine the heartbreak and the anger and the shock that Rand is experiencing at this point.
And imagine the terror they're feeling, right? Imagine you grew up next to the Unabomber or something like that. Like, found out that this person had been murdering people by sending out bombs the entire time you knew them. Like, you would feel betrayed as well.
Yeah.
And again, it's not his fault, but the prophecies do make it pretty clear that he's going to do some pretty horrible stuff. They just don't really make it clear that he's also going to do some great stuff. But Darth Rand's rough. Like, he doesn't treat the world good, There's some moments where the world suffers from Rand's insanity.
Yeah, definitely. There are definitely things that Rand does that are short-sighted. It's like, this will help me get to my goal, but it's going to have long-term consequences.
And he does. He has to break the world to heal it, but break it to bring it together, break it to get rid of all the current rulers so he can remake the order underneath him and make a decent resistance. But, I think one of the things I really like about the series is that even though he breaks the world, at the end of the Age of Legends, he breaks the Earth. At the end of the Third Age, he breaks the societies.
He breaks the people.
The people, and brings them back together in a better way, you know?
Yeah.
Like, the society with the dragon's peace and everything, so after the first breaking, they're worse off, and after the second, they're better off. And so that's that whole, he's born again to do better. This time, he can make better choices, and even though he's destined to break things again, he can make sure that knowledge survives, and people survive, and...
The prophecies talk about the dragon breaking the world again. And he does in a less literal way this time.
It's more of a figurative breaking.
Than a literal breaking, yeah.
Well, that's all I pretty much had to say about that chapter. Anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing to take from that is, like, this right here is the nail in the coffin for Rand's trust for Aes Sedai. Like,
Sure.
Everything that Moiraine had done to cultivate trust in Aes Sedai and cultivate trust in their knowledge and in her especially is completely undone in this single moment.
And it also reinforces the box, right? Like, he can't trust his allies and he can't trust his enemies.
Right.
And that lack of trust, is something that basically Codswain is dealing with, right? That's the whole Darth Rand, where he's making himself harder and harder and trusting less and less people. And yeah, I think this is really the turning point where it's like, he may have trusted before. He trusted enough to walk into a room alone with the two of them. I mean, he kind of thought he had the power, but he was willing to walk into that room with them and was willing to let her channel because she said it straight up.
Yeah, she promised not to hurt him, so he was
right.
like, okay, cool.
Cool. So there was some trust there, and, like, that doesn't happen again, really.
No.
No.
And, like, from this point on, anytime that he needs healing and Alanna is around, like, he will only let Alanna do it. He won't let any other Aes Sedai do it because he doesn't want another Aes Sedai to force a bond on him.
Right.
Also, the way that he does it for Alanna, like that one scene where, like, he holds out his hand to her. Like, she reaches up to grab his head and his face, and he's like, no. And just holds his hand out to her. Like, I think that Rand never becomes okay with Alanna. I think that he resents her for the rest of his life.
The rest of her life.
Sure.
I think once he's free of the bond, once she's dead and he's changed over to a different body and he is only bonded to the people he wants to be bonded to, I think he forgives her. Like, I think at that point,
When she does the right thing at the very last moment and severs the bond willingly to spare him the agony of it breaking.
She, like Ingtar, has a redeeming noble death.
I think Ingtar's death was much more noble and much more redeeming than hers.
Yes.
I think that she should have let that bond go a long time ago.
Yes. Right. That's the whole thing, is like, she could have, if in a way it does seem really like, okay, you could have dropped that any time? You're saying you could have just dropped it?
She could have dropped it right here, right now, when she sees the way that Rand reacts to it. She could have let him go and been like, this was not the right choice. She could have let it go when Cadsuane straight up told her, I'm going to exploit you for this.
She had many reasons to give it up, and she's just selfish, I think, and wants to keep it and wants to...
Yeah, many reasons and many opportunities to give it up, but also her reason for keeping it. Her biggest reason for keeping it was pretty selfish, honestly. Like, she was fond of Rand. She was fond of Rand, and there's a part of her that comes to love him in a certain way. There's that part of it, and then there's the other part of it where it's like she wanted to be connected to things that were important. This was a thing that was like a big part of her time as a novice. She wanted to be popular. She wanted to be successful. She wanted to be prestigious, which is why she wanted to be a green sister, because they're so glorious and so powerful and so mercurial and whatever. And like,
she wanted to be a football star.
Right. She wanted to be known for her spontaneity and her passion and whatever else. And like, she wanted to be bold. She wanted to be bold, and instead she was foolhardy.
So now it's Timber and your dog Ralph, who's freaking adorable.
Yeah.
Literally outshines Timber because he's got this like... Oh, how would you describe him other than like an adorable, cute dog? Like, I don't know how to get more specific than that. He's uniquely cute.
He is kind of uniquely cute. He's got like borderline Rottweiler coloring, but he's 20 pounds of like wiener dog terrier mix.
And he's adorable because he likes playing with the big dogs and chasing. So he runs up to him and gets up on his hind legs and like sort of puts his feet in the air and then turns around and runs away.
He's very hoppy. He's like a
very hoppy. Yeah. He loves pets. If you start petting him, he will burrow into your chest just to keep you petting him. Just absolutely adorable. And then we have the true owner of the house, the cat, Astral, who is gorgeous, green eyes, calico, loves to be picked up and squeezed. And then there's the snake too, right? What's his name?
Asmodean.
I just wanted you to say that on the podcast.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, that was a targeted question. He knew it was.
But yeah, so I invited him on, and we're going to try and basically sit down and dig into some of these chapters in a way that we've been having these conversations, and it's one of those things where we've been quarantined together for 5 months. We've been living together for a year and a half. Wheel of Time is the one subject, besides video games, that I think we can talk about the most.
And politics.
And politics, yes. We talk about politics a lot. But I'm not going to bring that too much up on the podcast. It may come up a little bit. Any questions for Travis?
Oh, yeah. Feel free to ask me stuff, guys. It's been like a year and a half since I've been on the podcast.
Do you remember when or what chapter you did?
The last time I was on was The Tangents Reborn.
Okay. So right after book 3.
Yeah. Yep, right at the end of book 3. And then before that, it was the chapter when Egwene explores the world of dreams for the first time because we were fighting about channeling in Teller and Riyadh.
Oh, God. Don't know. I'm shutting that down now. There's no Teller and Riyadh in this chapter. We'll get to it later. It's the debate that won't die.
Aradia, I'm working for a medical supply company as a insurance qualification specialist. So I'm basically the enforcer of red tape.
I would last, God, I don't know, a week, 2? How long do you think I'd last in that job?
Oh, God, before you, walked out on it?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you'd probably lose your mind after a couple of weeks.
You think I'd last a whole month?
If you pushed yourself.
Right. As I've gotten older, I've become more independent, more stubborn, and less willing to listen to authority figures.
You'd probably make it through training, spend 2 weeks out on the floor actually doing it without being under a trainer's nose and be like, you know what, fuck this.
Fire Phoenix, I agree with that. Phone stuff is a special kind of stress and one that I have always struggled with. I have gotten over it. I did do a job where I was selling beer tanks, and I spent a lot of that on the phone. But mostly it was answering phones and helping people who brewed beer buy beer equipment, which is just fun, frankly. But trying to deal with red tape and people. The problem is, I understand why people get frustrated when they talk to you because red tape sucks, right? But they also Travis is yeah, but I have to enforce. That's my job, is to make sure that the stuff we send out. Yeah, it's
no, and I get it too. Some of the things that insurance companies require to get this medical equipment approved is just stupid. If I get chart notes from a doctor that talks about the patient being non-weight bearing and having a fractured hip or femur, it's obvious. Common sense will tell you that they can't use a cane or a walker. Why do I specifically need chart notes that say that before Medicare will pay for it? I get the logic and why it's frustrating, but also Medicare is not relenting at all. And I have to make sure that we get paid for the equipment that we give out because, unfortunately, we don't have social medicine.
Yeah. Speaking of socialized medicine, this is a story I'm going to tell. I have been going to the same doctor for 8 years, between having some insurance sometimes, paying cash other times. I've managed to keep sort of consistent health care. Now that there's a pandemic, and I can't get health insurance through a job. I am on Oregon healthcare, and I was told that if I go back to the same doctor, I will lose my healthcare, and I have because it's out of network. I can't even pay cash.
Yeah, Oregon has a weird law that Medicaid patients, people on state insurance, cannot be charged anything out of pocket, period. So like all of their visits are covered, all of their prescriptions are completely covered. And honestly, from my side of things, working in a DME company doing durable medical equipment, DME, Oregon Medicaid is honestly my favorite to work with because they have the most relaxed qualifications and they cover almost everything. I didn't realize how shitty they were about what doctors you couldn't go to, so that was a big revelation for me when you went through that the other week.
Yeah. And to be honest, if my doctor had been in the OHP network, they would have been fine. And apparently they said something about family practitioners no longer qualifying, and I was like, well, okay. That seems weird. So I don't know. Who knows who decided that this particular hospital didn't qualify for the status, but
Painted Dead talked about being an auto insurance underwriter, and I feel like that can be super interesting.
Well, you like cars because you sold cars for a while.
I do like cars. Yeah, I was a car salesman for 2.5-ish years. It was fun. I miss my cars. I hate being a car salesman. It's not an ideal job for me, mostly because I don't like to force people or coerce people into buying things. But I loved my products. I was super passionate about them, and it was sad to leave that chapter. But having a job with like a stable schedule and weekends off and not having to worry about if I made a quota at the end of every week is really nice.
Yeah, now you just have tasks or what? I can never remember what you call them. Action items? No.
Yeah, actions. So my performance is. A big part of my performance is judged by my actions, which is basically how many orders did I get through and how many documents did I process on each one of those orders. And most orders have 2 to 3 documents that we have to process on them, and they expect us to get an average of at least 40 a day.
But it doesn't seem the most accurate way to actually measure productivity.
No, because there are times when I'm working my ass off, but I'm doing something like filling out a prior authorization or talking to a doctor on the phone or one of his MAs on the phone, and I spend an hour on the phone going over the criteria for the equipment that they're ordering, and I get 2 actions out of it. Whereas if the order has all of the right criteria in the notes already, I get those exact same 2 actions in 5 minutes.
Like I said, I ordered my Canadian birth certificate. I'm as a process to get my Canadian passport because, frankly, I'm worried about long-term healthcare. And if I get sick, I'm getting to the point where I'm like, I'm turning 40, and after 40, you kind of have to worry about chronic illness.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that I have relatively decent insurance through my job that doesn't cost me an exorbitant amount of money, but it's still more expensive than it should be, especially because my copay or out-of-pocket and deductible stuff is higher than it should be for paying what I pay monthly. But, it's dumb. The whole point that I have insurance and that I pay almost $200 a month for it is so when I go to a doctor's office, I don't have to break the bank because I broke my arm. And I have to pay $4,000 out of pocket before my insurance will cover anything. That was the whole reason I had insurance.
But I will say, for all my complaints, I just say I went off on OHP and making me go to a different doctor, and it pissed me off. But OHP has been there. It's been easy to get. It's been easy to use. They pay for fucking everything. And I don't know. Yeah, it's been the best health insurance I've had. I'm just upset that my doctor wasn't part of it. I think John agreed to still take a first pass at these guys, so he does all the hard work of actually aligning them and making sure that the 2 tracks are synced up.
John, you're an amazing person. You don't get to cut
John's.
You don't get to cut this out. You have to acknowledge that you're an amazing person because you fucking deserve it.
Second you on that. I mean, he's he's been super supportive for years.
Honestly, I would totally love to meet John. We've chatted several times on Discord way back when I was more active, more consistently. But no, he's cool people. And the fact that he does so much for this podcast, just like because he loves the podcast, is invaluable.
He doesn't just have the dedication, but he also has the skills and like the tenacity to record however many hours of audio I have thrown at him. And he's like, yeah, I got it. I'm like, are you sure? Like, it's a pretty heavy mountain that I'm throwing at you. Duty is heavier than a mountain. He's like, no, I got it. No problem. Just throw more weight on the back. But yeah, he says it's better than editing the stuff he has to do for work, so.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably much more interested in talking about the Wheel of Time than whatever he's doing for work.
But, and, there's so many people who, again, I want to acknowledge, but I'm not going to do that right now because I'm going to forget them. But John is always at the top of the list for his consistently amazing work. Aradia's up there, too, and Talir has to be up there with all the work she's put in for SpoilerCon. Mahale. I mean, just for years now, she's put in, again, skilled labor. And the whole planning committee, who I've talked about before, but the you guys are going to be blown away by SpoilerCon, and I'm not saying any more than that. Follow the Twitter if you want announcements. They're coming out about the guests, and sign up for the newsletter. But expect to be amazed.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who lives with Seth and gets to eavesdrop on all of those conversations, I can tell you that I'm excited.
Probably not as excited as I am.
This is true.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?